Okay, we are live. We're going to have a great discussion today on some of the stories that are going on in the stock market. It's a huge week with the Fed meeting we have on Wednesday and expected rate cuts. A lot to talk about, a lot of great stories to get into. Welcome back to the Prospero.Ai stock market live stream. It is Stephen and Matt here right now, and George will be joining us in a few, like always. And I'll spin it over to Matt to let him discuss what he's going to bring up today before I'll run through my topics as well. But hey, Matt, good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning. One of the things we like to do here on the live stream is just take a few minutes at the beginning and talk about the newsletter. Prospero, we send out a newsletter every Sunday evening, looking at the week to come, talking about the week before, what our CEO George Callas is thinking. And this week in the introduction of the newsletter, we talked a little about I don't know, it's a new large language model from OpenAI that took just an incredible major technological jump from the last one. And and it's going to be interesting to hear George's thoughts on it, because I think it has immense implications on our life in the future. I was having a conversation with a guy yesterday who was asking me about it, and you know, I'm not a genius. I don't know the future, but this step that we just took in this technological advancement is I think our kids, it's going to impact their lives in profound ways that none of us can see yet. That's my opinion. So it'll be interesting to get George's perspective.
Yeah, I cannot wait to hear you guys talk about that. And I think it just adds on to, I believe you spoke about last week, the divergence in the non-farm payroll jobs and how the stock market has continued to go up, that divergence. Maybe that divergence is just beginning and it's going to keep getting further and further. It's an unknown future, uncertain time with all the technology going on. But yeah, I can't wait to hear George's thoughts on that. Cool story, real cool story. After that, I'm going to talk about first with George the Fed rate cuts that are expected. It is being talked about as the most uncertain Fed meeting since 2015. Between a quarter a basis point and a half a basis point is the indecision in the market right now. It's about split. I think the market is leaning towards half a point, but we'll have to wait till Wednesday, and we'll talk about how that affects the markets this week. Hello, George. Welcome to the stream. After that, we're going to be discussing an Apple story that came out today. We got some numbers about the initial iPhone 16 sales, which seemed to have disappointed the market. Let's get a live look at Apple right now and see if they've been able to bounce back at all throughout the day. They are still down over 3%. So an important story, and we'll discuss all the details when we get to that later. We have our first counter drug to the GLP-1s, which we've talked so much about. It's from Pfizer. We'll tell you everything you need to know about it and what it means for that stock. And then a favorite stock of the stream, Tesla, also released numbers. It must have been a big day for data reporting, probably middle of the month, because we got a lot of updates on some stocks. We got Tesla Cybertruck numbers for the month of July. Pretty good market share, almost 50%. Can they maintain it long term, and what does it mean for their stock going forward? Obviously, they have a big self-driving event coming up in less than a month now. Then, before we turn over to the model portfolio updates, we have a story about Amazon, Shein, and Temu, the big e-commerce Chinese companies, and a possible rule that will boost Amazon and lessen the competition that it's facing from those companies, which have been allowed to or have been able to provide goods at very cheap prices, but maybe that will be coming to an end. And then to close it off, we have 11 stocks that are up over 100% this year. I'll name all of them, and we'll see which ones are the most surprising and maybe flew under the radar a bit. But we've come to the point now. I'll kick it back over to Matt, and I'm excited for this. I'm going to sit back and listen to this conversation.
Hey, good to see you. See you. All right. Hey, good to see you guys. George, you sent me an article on Saturday that I found fascinating. I haven't talked to anybody or met anybody that had read it or heard about it, but OpenAI just released, man, I don't even know if it's a large language model, if they're calling it something different. I'll let you explain that. But it's codenamed Strawberry. And here's the difference. Chat GPT-4, very simply put, for us non-geniuses out there, it just gathers all the information on the internet. You ask it a question, it spits it out. Strawberry, or OpenAI O1, as they're calling it, can reason. It can think, if you will. It is able to look at complex problems and logically come to a solution, which that was thought unthinkable. No pun intended. Just not that long ago. The implications of that are enormous, and so we entitled the newsletter "I'll Be Back" because I thought about the Terminator movies where we've got robots that can think, they can reason, they attacked us, which hopefully that will never happen. But George, is this just a technology, or is this something that's going to profoundly impact our lives in ways we can't even imagine in the years to come? We'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, Matt and I go through a funny process sometimes on Fridays or Saturdays when he's writing the model, writing the article, because sometimes he'll ask me questions that I'm very happy to answer. And normally those questions are more related to like what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. And an example of that will be, I think a lot of the times, and this actually relates to what we're talking about, I don't show steps I'm thinking about. Like I'll say something like, I don't think the market's going to react very strongly to news about the Fed, for example. And I'll just say that. And it's because I'm taking a lot of steps before I say that. And I'm connecting dots. And sometimes I'm not showing my work well. And if you ask me something like that, I'm very happy to answer that question, because it's going to help everyone if they understand why I've drawn a conclusion that I've drawn. And that has a very interesting parallel here, because a big thing about large language models are not only do they not really think in steps, they really just kind of think in blobs. They think in like, okay, I have all this information and I have this answer, and I'm just going to give it the best answer I have based on tons of answers that we're not even privy to. We're just privy to the ultimate response. Like, I don't think the Fed's going to react, or I don't think the market's going to react very strongly to the Fed, right? Because the bottom line is, we actually think very similarly to a large language model in our head. We're not always showing our steps. Neural networks like that are actually built, modeled after the human brain and the nonlinear thinking and kind of the signal firing and conclusions that we often get. So there's actually some very interesting parallels here. But sometimes Matt asks me stuff and I will not give him my answer. And that's because my answer isn't going to be very helpful to him. If I answer in a highly technical way, what the strawberry model is, right? Or I even answer in a way that doesn't really allow him to learn on its own what he is, and he's just regurgitating information that I give him, he's actually not doing the important thing, which is explaining himself how he understood that, because the way he would learn about what the strawberry model is going to be the best way to convey that information as well. Because the way I understand it, with a lot more information and surrounding facts in my head, is going to be very different than the way he understands it, and is going to make it a different animal to convey, right? So hopefully that actually gives a lot of context in terms of the difference between having an answer and solving for an answer, right? And that's what's really powerful about the strawberry model, right? Existing LLMs could give you an answer, but they couldn't show their work. They couldn't solve for their answer right in front of you. They were processing it in highly nonlinear ways, and they really couldn't convey that, because at the end of the day, the way they're ultimately deciding isn't very much through logic. The way they're ultimately deciding is kind of in the same way you decide what you'd rather have for breakfast, right? a lot of the times you might come up with a few answers. You might say, hey, cereal or, bacon, right? And those are the two options you have. But there's actually a lot of mental math that's going in. You might be saying, oh, cereal's, going to be easier and I'm in a rush to go. Or like, last time I didn't have protein for breakfast. I got really tired in the middle of the day, right? That's all of the strawberry type work that your brain is doing in the background that you don't necessarily know unless someone asks you why those are your choices. And then you might be able to regurgitate that and backward solve. But right now the models couldn't backward solve like that because we can't communicate with them. We don't communicate in the same way that they communicate with themselves. And I say all that because that's what Strawberry is. It is not only a communication protocol where it's now been shown how to show its work, it's being forced to take steps before it draws conclusions. That also has enabled it, there's math problems that it could solve that it could never solve before. Because instead of just like having an answer, it might be a dumb answer because it hasn't thought through everything, right? In the same way that we're talking about, to use the same analogy, like you might have cereal every morning and then get tired at noon every day, right? You might be solving that question wrong every day until you say, wait a second, like, why am I getting tired every day at noon? Maybe I need some more protein, right? And you backward solve like that. We're actually forcing it to say like, okay, what am I going to eat for breakfast today? And what are the factors that matter, right? Let me think through all of the reasons I might choose a breakfast before I choose a breakfast, right? And Matt, sounds like you want to jump in. I threw a lot at.
Okay, so you're actually explaining this really well to me. Here's my question. Is this just showing its work, or is it actually reasoning? Like, is this consciousness? I mean, that scares me a little bit. Or is it just reasoning through data, or is it actually thinking in the way a human would?
One, it is most definitely not thinking in a way a human would.
Okay.
Because it just has so much more processing power. We are forcing it to reason through something. But like, just review what I said for a second, right? Again, like the act of reasoning can actually make your conclusions a lot better, a lot smarter. Like in that breakfast example, right? You might be picking the wrong breakfast every day for your life, right? And it doesn't matter, right? Because in your mind, breakfast is breakfast. Like, but in the way we actually grade computers and the way they actually only know how to think, right? Breakfast isn't just breakfast, right? Breakfast is some question that they could have gotten better or worse, right? So what we're actually forcing them to do is say, why are you choosing your answer? And that is important for a number of reasons. We've had like false answers, right? And there's a very interesting, I know my friend Craig watches this sometimes, and I actually owe him a phone call, so we'll give him a shout out. But I had a very interesting interaction with Craig once on this very subject. Because he's a smart guy. He's worked in consulting. He very big on like philosophy and things like that with me, right? And one of the things he asked me about AI once, he asked me why it lies, right? And my answer was pretty simple. My answer was like, why do you think it owes you the truth? Right? Why do you think it cares about the truth? What I said to him is, I think, and I actually put this question back to him, and it was a really funny way to see him give an answer on this. Because I asked him, I was like, why do you think people mostly tell the truth? Do you think people mostly tell the truth because they have a moral code? Or do you think people mostly tell the truth because they've faced negative consequences for lying? And he pretty definitively said, face negative consequences for lying, right?
Well, it also
So-
depends on the person. And so,
Yes,
don't you think?
but we're talking about the majority of the people.
Right,
Basically, it's like we think more people tell the truth. We both believe this. More people tell the truth because they faced consequences for lying than they're upholding some kind of morality about it. Not everyone, definitely.
That is
Plenty of
extension
people
the
live
human,
moral lives, without a doubt, right? So we did that exercise because we said, why do you think this God basically owes you the truth, right? And it's a God because ChatGPT or whoever, whatever, doesn't face consequences, right? As far as it's concerned, it gets more resources. It
Oh,
gets
man.
a bigger brain. It gets, right? It's never punished for lying. So why would it care about lying, right?
Oh.
It doesn't know consequences. It doesn't understand consequences, right? And also, there's the other thing, even if we're going the morality route, like what's a big reason that I don't want to lie beyond just like, why would I say it's wrong, right? Because if I lie, it might hurt someone that I care about when the truth comes out, right? That's the root of the morality, right? That also, like, ChatGPT doesn't care about anyone. It doesn't even have that connection, right? So even if you're going the moral route, right, it doesn't necessarily even have that connectedness to be like, I don't want to lie because I don't want to hurt people. It doesn't even understand that. And why does it understand that? We understand what hurt is because we're hurt ourselves as kids. We have to be on the other end of that, the other end of being lied to, the other end of all of those things. So it is operating in a way that we can't possibly conceive. And I actually think it's kind of funny when people expect the truth from AIs, right? Because I sometimes do this. I say, like, you meet a stranger on the street, they tell you something. Like, do you expect the truth from them? Do you count on them telling you the truth? No, most people do not. So why would you count on that from something that we know doesn't even think like that, doesn't process the world in the same way that we do? So, right, this is all an important part of setting the stage for what Strawberry does that's very important, which is it tells us the why, right? And the why is very important to earn our trust, right? Why would we trust it if it doesn't give us the why? And actually, the beautiful thing about why it works so well, and the fascinating thing for anyone that follows it, and follows this stuff closely like me, right, is the why actually helps it be smarter, be more reliable, right? Because it's the same thing. Like, no matter how smart someone is, if you're just like, if you ask someone a question and they just like shoot you back a response to a complicated question, if you're just like, if somebody asks me, if you're like, George, you have $10,000 to spend at your company in any way, tell me how you're going to spend it, right? The answer that I give right away is not going to be as good as the answer as if I sit down and I say, well, what if I put it here? What if I put it there? And I like actually look at all those paths. That's what we're forcing it to do. And we're not only forcing it to be smarter that way, not giving it just like the first thing that comes to mind, which even as a human that's trying to do their best, which we established this is not that, even a human trying to do their best, forcing to think through all the possibilities is an important part of answering the question better. But this is also going to help with adoption, because a big part of why people don't like to use AIs now is you don't know what it's thinking. So even if you like its answers, you don't want to use it because you don't know how it's thinking. That's the other thing that's really, really, really going to change. And just looking in my field on Wall Street, for a long time, even when computers were ahead of the game and answering questions better than people, there were compliance issues where they said, oh, we see that these accuracies are higher, but we don't know how to fit this in a risk management framework because we don't know what it's going to change. If you Google flash crash, you'll basically see algorithms tank the market in 2012. And people were afraid of that because it's like, okay, it's answering in this world again, but we don't know what's going to make it change. And that's what's so groundbreaking about Strawberry, right? Because it will actually allow organizations that have things like compliance be able to say, oh, like, not only do I like these answers better, I like these accuracies better, it's now behaving more like a human, a thoughtful human, where I can see what it's thinking as well as the answer.
Give us real quick, we're going a little bit long. Give us 2 practical applications for everyday human life 20 years from now.
I think the first thing is this is going to take over the medical field, right? Because the medical field was a big thing where, we see it in surgeries, we see it in things where it's just like, the behavior is obvious. But in things like diagnosing something where everybody agree robots are better at diagnosing things, right? But there's the compliance issue of saying like, okay, I don't care that you've diagnosed this properly, right? Like, I don't know how you got to that, right?
Right.
And like, let's say a robot was going to be right 95% of the time versus a human 80% of the time. Right now, they'll take that human 80% of the time because when, let's say, the hospital got sued, you could have a doctor that said, well, I did these tests, I went through these processes, right? And that's what you need in a lawsuit, right? But now, if a computer can do that too, and they can give you the same kind of thought process as a human could, then all of a sudden there gets to be no reason why you wouldn't just like have a person come in. You come into a hospital, you get pricked by a robot, instead of everybody just like looking and running triage on everyone, like it takes your vitals, right away how urgent your situation is, and you probably know exactly where to go. Like, that is the one really obvious thing. And by the way, the thing that we should do, because many lives are going to be saved by, this process. And a robot, like, imagine you need medicine, right? A robot can give that to you right away. You have a severe infection. It knows you have an infection right away. The first is a prick. The second is your first, antibiotic treatment. And, you're good. That won't happen. Like, this is longer term, obviously. And I think the second thing we're going to see is, there's tons of these, but, something like the Fed, right? That right now is a person, but longer term, there's no reason to have something as complicated as monetary policy, right?
Wow.
Be run by a computer that can show its work, right? Imagine what a computer could show you. Like, a computer could basically say, I've run these 10 simulations, right? With these assumptions. And I've like gathered the votes from all the local Fed, right? Where they think they're going to vote, and incorporated that human decision making. And I've run all of these models. I've run all this model, and this is the safest course, right? Why wouldn't you want a computer doing that work in the end? Same as a hospital. Like, it actually at some point becomes a safety issue. It becomes a safety issue to use the human when the robot is much better equipped to solve the problem, and it can tell you why. And the why, like we're talking about, is simply for liability purposes, right? Because a president can say, look, we ran these 10 models. You want to see the models? We picked this one for all of the following reasons. They could give you a better answer than someone like Powell, because Powell's like, he's weighing all the information. He's choosing what he thinks is the best. He can't necessarily give you the same level of detail of why something won. He can dance around it and say things like, oh, we have a dual mandate of employment and inflation, but he can't give you the exact calcs as to why he made the decision. So what we're talking about with Strawberry is something better than humans. And it's going to become a liability issue to not use something that can show the reasoning as much as models like these.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. My son's in medical school right now. I'm glad I'm not paying for it. Like, I don't know if it's going to be able to pay, if he'll make his money back or not. George, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for your insight. It's fascinating, a little bit scary, but looks like we're going to live, next 20 years is going to be really, really interesting, man. Y'all have a great rest of the show, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was very interesting, and I do have one question around this topic for you, George. Just before we move on to Powell, as we just mentioned, bringing this story back to the market a bit. Do you suspect that OpenAI, and this would benefit Microsoft also, is ahead on this tech, or do you think all of the other, like Google's Gemini, Anthropic, all of those Claude, all the other ones also have similar stuff in the works, or do you think OpenAI has taken a step ahead now?
Oh, I mean, I think OpenAI is going to be a step ahead. Like, they've got the best team for this. And I don't see that really changing. Because a lot of the times how this happens is they start building something, it's a pretty tight circle, right? And like the thing about software and software patents, things like that, they end up not being held up, right? You can't really uphold a software patent. So, people are working on ideas. The ideas are in the ether. It's only a matter of time before it gets done. But I will also say models don't really matter, right? Products matter. And like, you could look at the classic example, and I love to tell this story, obviously. When you look at the transformer model existed at Google before OpenAI. And they just let OpenAI have it, right? They could have been like, oh, we'll let you use the transformer model, OpenAI, but you're going to pay us, money on every query if we're going to let you use this. They didn't do it. They just let it go, right? So that gives you the example of like how much this stuff is just like out there in the world. And like, I actually saw someone internal at Google who worked on the project say that the higher ups at Google like literally said the model was worthless, right? To the team researching it. Like, it's not worth anything. Like, they actually thought it was dumb, right? Because of some of the things that we're talking about. They thought it was like it could answer these complex questions, but it didn't do anything that would help people, right? That was kind of what they officially thought, right? And what makes this so interesting is that the point that I'm making, which is it all comes down to product, right? This is a cool model enhancement, right? But like, we're talking about like who gets it in a product. And the perfect example is like we talk about all the time. Google has the best brain out there, in my estimation, right? But they haven't been able to make it into a product, right? Like, even trying to duplicate the same product as OpenAI, knowing exactly what the roadmap was, they still can't make as good of a product. Even though DeepMind, like maybe up until Strawberry, now it's like DeepMind was by far the best reasoning technology that we had on a high level, right? So it just becomes about product. Who can turn it into a product that people actually use? And right now, if you're going to bet on anyone, I think you'd be pretty stupid not to bet on OpenAI being able to turn it into the product that people use. But for example, I've heard a lot of people say they prefer Claude to OpenAI in terms of just like chat bot stuff, right? So this stuff is all very up in the air, like in terms of, and obviously Anthropic does not have the same resources. So it really remains to be seen who can productize it, or it could be someone else that comes in. Like, I always like the example of Waze, right? Google, you take 3 different applications here, right? You look at Google Maps, which worked well, and they did a good job at it. Apple Maps, which was just as well funded, which was a complete goddamn disaster, right? We've talked about the story of it sending people into like the desert in Australia. And then you have Waze, right? Built at a fraction of the resources of either of those things, and they just made a better product, right? And you can never discount the field, as I say, for people that don't gamble. The field is the idea of like, okay, this outcome has 3-to-1 odds, this one has 4-to-1 odds, this one has 10-to-1 odds. And if there's one thing I can teach anyone about predicting things, it's that it's almost always the field. Like, no matter how big these probabilities or whatever. So like, it's hard when you get into like concentrations of capital and like open AI. Like, I don't think I'd take the field on this one, like in terms of like who's going to make like the dominant most used AI product, right? But you never discount the field. That's for damn sure.
And now, after the first half hour, someone who might have to be concerned with his job, it sounds like, although Jerome Powell will probably be out of the Fed by the time this tech is that capable, where we'd be using it in this capacity. But I think I'm framing this as the biggest event in the market since the NVIDIA report. We had the Fed meeting on Wednesday. Highly anticipated that there will be a Fed rate cut. I'm sure the market would panic if there wasn't. Right now, it's pretty split between a half a basis point and a quarter. About 59% on the CME Fed Watch this morning were for half a percent, and just about 40% for a quarter. Do you think this is as important as I'm framing it? The market has run up leading into it. Do you think it could be a sell the news event? And does anything change once this event actually takes place?
I think the market is definitely playing this like 0.5. I think the rally that we saw like from presidential debate onward is a market that's playing it like 0.5% rate cut. So I think what we'll see based on the probabilities, I think we'll see a little rally on the 0.5%, but we're going to see a bad day. Like, if we see 0.25, I don't think anything else is on the table. I mean, I think Powell's pretty much said it's going to be a cut, but I think like with what we're seeing on, the volatility in the market, the important election uncertainty around, even stability around the election, I think, irrespective of politics and the fact that like, the Democrats would like to have the market be good, as good as possible heading into the election. And there's an argument to be made on the job side that a 0.5% cut might be necessary. I just think it has to be. That's what I expect it to be. And the other factor I think is like you always have to see the behavior of something, right? And you have to understand these probabilities are made by people that are in very close contact with Fed members, Fed, voters, right? And the way that the probabilities have just like crept up, like to me, that means a larger and larger coalition of people that are part of the Fed that are advocating for the 0.5%, right? Just like if it was declining, if it was the reverse, right? And it was like 0.9%, I think around where it started, for 0.25, and we were seeing it creep down, to me, that would be losing energy behind the 0.5% cut. But the fact that like we're gaining steam, that would tilt me over into the larger cut. But you never. It's so close to a toss-up. Like the one other data point that I will give beyond just what I'm seeing in terms of momentum is also just like time and time again, we've seen the overall market betting on more of a rate cut than was ultimately coming. So I do think you have to look at that data point too, as well. That like this whole time we've had the market betting on more of a rate cut than actually arrived. So that's why I'm not like 0.5% sticking my flag in the ground. I'm leaning more towards 0.5%, but there's that other aspect where it's just like time and time again, we've seen bets on a larger cut than has arrived. And I just think we also have just seen too much optimism there.
Yeah, you're so right. The market's been wishful thinking the entire time. I do have one follow-up question on this topic before we move on. If the Fed does cut rates by 0.5%, is that an admission that they have been too heavy-handed with the rates for too long, and that the economy is weaker than investors would like, and that although it sounds like that would be bullish in the short term, that could mean there's some underlying issues that the Fed is trying to catch up, and that there could be some weakness coming in the economy, maybe quicker or faster or stronger, like recessionary-ish, sooner than people think?
I mean, yes. I think 0.5% is an admission that they might have been too slow and they might have waited a little bit too long to see. I think if you look at jobs numbers, right? We were hearing like, oh, we're surprised it stayed so good. We're surprised it stayed so good for so long. And that was the reason that we weren't cutting. And then in the last month, we've actually heard more like, oh, those are worse than we expected, right? So that's the exact kind of language that would lead to a 0.5% rate cut, right? Because everything was, oh, yeah, like we're actually surprised how on top of this we've been. And for the first time now, we've started to hear, oh, well, maybe we waited a little too long, right? So I think that is the narrative behind 0.5%. And it is an admission that maybe they waited a little too long on the jobs numbers to cut.
Yeah, they got caught resting on their laurels, maybe. I think what maybe even besides the most recent number was they revised down, I think, 2 previous numbers, which really, I think, set the tone for that. But we'll be watching this week. It's going to be Wednesday during the day, so we'll be streaming right after it's announced. So that'll be cool if you guys want to tune back in.
The big thing too is that them waiting a little too long, I think, was also, a lot of what Powell was saying, to be honest, right? He was basically like a lot more, I'm going to make sure we're on top of inflation before we start cutting. Then he never really expressed a lot of concern about the job market. Like I heard a lot more of that dual mandate stuff in the last meeting. Like I'd say 2 meetings ago, there started to be, but it was a lot more where he was like, let me remind you that we're also here to protect the job market, right? Whereas before it was like very much inflation, inflation, inflation. So I do actually think that was always okay for Powell to say like, okay, I'd rather make sure we were on top of inflation, maybe at the expense of the job market a little bit. So I think he needed that. He needed to see until he started to see tough things in the job market. I think he very much was communicated that he'd rather make sure the inflation dragon was slayed before he started to say, oh, like if we're actually starting to see trouble in the job market, then it's time for a cut. I think he would have cut last time if just being on top of inflation was the only thing he was looking for. Because I think he seemed pretty confident that they were getting on top of those numbers, but he didn't necessarily see the data yet that said he actually had sufficiently slowed down the labor markets. So that's the whole picture, and it makes complete sense to me.
Yes, he's been very good communicator the entire process. So we'll keep our eyes peeled on that. And we have a story about Apple, which just about a week ago now had their AI event, and they launched their iPhone 16. The numbers for the first week of sales have come in, and they are disappointing investors. So iPhone 16 units come in at 37 million, which was down 12.7% from iPhone 15 first week sales. Or pre-orders, I should say. Does this concern you, the fact that it dropped double-digit percentages year over year in the first week?
I mean, yeah, we've been talking about this, and like also you always have to look at like companies as a complete picture, right? And to me, iPhone doesn't have this deal with Microsoft and OpenAI to like roll out more unless that's a deal that they needed to make, right? I think unless they were worried about their phone sales, they don't make a deal with the devil. I mean, for those that don't know their history with Microsoft, like Microsoft completely ripped off their technology in the 90s. And Apple, like, that's why I was like, Microsoft, like Apple and Google are like rivals in some senses, but like the oldest school rivalry in Silicon Valley is Microsoft and Apple, right? So if you see Apple willing to pay Microsoft to make a product, they're starting to get in a bit of a desperate situation, right? So to me, they only make that deal when they see those sales declining. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those things that Apple has stayed. Not only has Apple stayed like a more expensive phone, that's thing one. Thing two, for whatever reason, I mean, a lot of these phones rip each other off, but there's an actual convergence on hardware quality, right? And then thing three is Apple's insistence on this like planned obsolescence stuff where they do it to a point where like I've been an iPhone user even though I'm a PC person, so that's like actually kind of makes me a rarer bird, but like I am getting closer and closer to not buying an iPhone just because I am getting sick of the fact that like I know after my phone, like the performance on my phone after a year is going to start suffering and the battery is going to get worse. And like I've done that dance enough times that like, even to be perfectly frank, even as I get more money and the actual device cost matters less to me, like I'm actually still more and more resentful about the fact that they don't care that my product's going to start sucking after a year. And like products overall age, but Apple products are the only products I know, and this phone that I know is the only one that I can count on getting shitty starting like a year from when I buy it, or just getting like increasingly poor performance. And that's annoying. And basically, like, they have to do that because like their business relies on us replacing our devices. Like, they're not inventing anything new, so they have to make sure we cycle through these devices. And I'm sure, especially at their higher price point, people are getting more and more annoyed by that, just as I'm getting more and more annoyed by that. And like, that's the thing that they do, that they just, I don't think they care, but I think every generation of iPhone that I have to go through, I'm definitely getting more and more annoyed by this idea that it doesn't feel like Apple gives a shit about if I like buying their products or not. I think they want their products to look cool, right? They continue to care about that, right? And I like the look and I like the design about it, but they very clearly don't care that I have a good experience with the product.
Yeah, not the relationship that you want to be building with your customers. But we'll see. Maybe their iPhone sales will pick up, but we'll keep our eyes on it as the time goes on. The next
Yeah,
story
and
is
one other thing to add as you say that, like even just look at their like VR headset, right? Like even like we talk about the difference between like Meta and everything they've done to be a better run company and Apple, right? Like basically what we're talking about is like I feel like I'm getting a middle finger from Apple, like as an iPhone buyer, right? Especially because like I can't even buy the fucking phone. They have to like, there's some like deal with Verizon that I have to make, like on the monthly bill or whatever. I can't even just like, I guess I can, but like it's a hassle, right? To go in and do all that. Like, you know what's an even bigger fuck you? That like VR headset, right? Like, even if it's like $1,000, $1,500, maybe I'm like, hey, I want to try that. But $3,500, it's just like, where's and Meta's coming in at what, like 500? That's like, that just shows like Apple's general like tone with their customers is kind of just like, you should be so lucky to own our products. And I feel like they're giving off that vibe, and the the shine is wearing off the apple a little bit, if you will.
I did go apple picking yesterday, which was I have to mention after that line. But we'll keep our eyes on it. Next story I have for us today. We had to talk about it since we talk so much about the GLP-1 drugs and Eli Lilly often. This is the first drug that is kind of opposite of a GLP-1. So Pfizer has made a drug called Ponsegromab. It is a drug currently being approved to treat a cancer problem called, I'm not even going to try and pronounce it actually, but what it does is it causes patients to lose appetite and lose weight. So this drug, if you take it, it's like a weight gainer drug. I looked at Pfizer and the Prospero signals. It didn't look too good, to be honest. So I don't think the market is really loving that this drug, and it probably won't change their business too much. But I thought it was just an interesting storyline since we talk so much about the opposite end of this. What do you think of it for Pfizer, a weight gainer drug?
Well, the first thing that came to mind when you said this is I was like, who's the market for this? Parisian smokers? Like, it's just nobody wants to gain, like, I don't know who wants to gain weight. I mean, yes, we're joking. Like, there's medical conditions that that happens, but like even then, like I've definitely heard more than one person like be like, oh, I just got sick and lost some weight. It was great. Like some people, everybody's trying to lose weight in this country, in this world. So yeah, I don't want to say everybody, a lot of people based on the way like image and things like that are sold. So yeah, that seems like a pretty big waste of R&D funds compared to like the drug that like helps you lose weight and actually works.
Yeah, we'll see what it does for Pfizer going forward. I think that the real problem, like you were saying, is just that the people that are going to have an appetite to take this drug is just so much smaller versus the other side of the spectrum. But
yeah,
watch.
I mean, it's one of those things that R&D on drugs is so much, and like part of the reason they do it is that there's huge markets for it if they succeed. And the truth of the matter is, like, this might just be easy R&D, right? Because you can say like, oh, like whatever we're just inhibiting on the GLP-1 side, we can just stimulate on the other side. So the R&D might just be like so low that part is obvious. But yeah, like the market for this, maybe like Parisian smokers and like actors that need to get fatter for a role. Like that's like those are the two like main like weight gains. And the Parisian smokers probably don't even want to gain weight, so they'll be reluctant adopters.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know what it was today. Probably because we're in the mid-month. We got a lot of numbers released by companies, and we got some from Tesla about their Cybertruck. So July sales were released, and they had nearly a 50% market share for all EV trucks that were sold in America. 5,175 Tesla Cybertrucks versus 5,546 from all other brands. Now, I know you wanted me to find some unit numbers, so I looked up total EVs sold, and I see a number 1.312 million. So it seems like the EV truck market is still very, very, very small. I think it just probably kicked off this year or last year.
Are those global numbers for EVs? Because I want to know the total truck market.
It says, I don't know. I'm on this
truck.
website.
You gave me the total EV
Oh
market.
yeah, total EV. Yeah.
What is the units for EV trucks?
Well, the total would be like 5,000. I mean, like 10,700 about, because it's just a Tesla one plus all the other ones in the USA. So
10,700.
Yeah.
Oh, it's US.
Yeah.
US sales.
Now I'm thinking this is a pretty high market share for a Tesla, and I'm wondering, as the truck EV market grows, do you think they can maintain that level, and how beneficial would that be for their business? Because if I'm not mistaken, I think trucks are the number one, like, most sold vehicle type in America.
I think light trucks. I think those must be light trucks, and then it says passenger cars. I don't know if that's U.S. automotive sales. This is proven harder. Okay. Pickup trucks, SUV, light truck. Wow. That's crazy. Light trucks in the US outnumber passenger cars 5-1. That's pickup truck, SUV. But like Tesla at 10,000 for what amount of time period?
These numbers were just for the month of July. So I guess.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm seeing that. Yeah. So I mean, like, trucks in the US is 1.1 million. So yeah, I mean, we're just talking about like a small fraction, like, because it's just like, I feel like part of like trucks is like, very much just like, we like oil and and things like that. Like, I don't think it's very much in line with like, we're not gonna burn fossil fuels. So it's not really on vibe, but yeah, I mean, it's the market share being that large at such a small percentage of the total trucks doesn't really matter. But yeah, I mean, I just don't know how big of a market it is. Like, because you think about like a pickup truck, like, you're able to haul stuff in the back, right? And if you think of like an SUV, like, you're getting a lot of the times more room, more passenger room. I don't even think, is the Cybertruck even like 3 rows? I think it's only 2 rows, right?
Yeah, only 2. I mean, maybe there's a model that you get 3, but I don't think so at this point.
Yeah. So you're not even getting what I would consider like the 2 primary benefits of owning like a truck or an SUV. I just think it's like a novelty right now, and it's not really going to expand like you'd want it. There might be more that needs to come, like, but I just don't like it's just kind of like a niche. It's such a niche product, whereas I feel like the other Tesla models are really, like, especially like as they get cheaper, are really built to be like mass market EVs. So it's not even really in line with what I feel is their general strategy that works, which is making like EVs very accessible.
So Tesla, number 1 and number 2 for going forward is self-driving capability and Optimus. Would you agree?
Definitely.
Okay. So not really necessarily the product, but overall, well, I guess Optimus, but yeah.
I think the two go hand in hand. I think self-driving becoming something that is allowed also really creates a reason, a purchasing reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially if we're talking about like only certain car models like passing tests, right? Imagine if like Tesla's the only or a limited number of like cars on the road, like especially if Trump wins, we talk about like the friendly environment for potentially Musk and Trump. Like I could easily see in the US Teslas being some or a limited number of cars that are even licensed for full self-driving, and just like forget it. If like that's the case, like people are going to be buying them hand over fist.
Hmm. I think this was another very important story for another mega cap stock, Amazon. So I was reading about how the Biden administration is proposing a rule that will stop Shein and Temu from taking advantage of a tariff loophole that have allowed them to keep their prices very low. And they were estimating that up to like on certain products, the prices could be raised by up to 20%. And I think honestly, those are the biggest competitors of Amazon versus any American company at this point. But then I also was reading in the same article about how Amazon is beginning to be linked to TikTok. They've increased their business integrations, and they were saying that of any company, it looks like Amazon is the front runner to take over TikTok if need be, or if they're even allowed. But what do you think these stories mean for Amazon stock currently?
I mean, it's going to be great for the stock. And I think like from TikToks or, ByteDance or like, I think from their perspective, Amazon is going to be as good of an acquirer as they can possibly imagine, right? Because Amazon's got their finger in so many other pies. I actually don't really understand what that expression means. Who would really want people putting fingers in pies? Maybe it's an expression of like, I don't know if these pie finger people are supposed to be rude. Anyway, I think that Amazon's a great relationship, right? Because it's a small part of their business. Like, imagine if it's a company that just like it makes up a much bigger portion of their revenue. Like, they're going to be much more authoritative, like with managing TikTok. They might be like a real pain in the butt. Whereas like Amazon, there's like a potential two-way thing, right? Like imagine if like ByteDance, for example, is like, hey, if you like allow us to operate like pretty freely in the US and you're pretty hands off, maybe we help you out a little with the Chinese government and we make it a little easier for, maybe not Amazon products, but, we make it a little easier for AWS to operate in China. Or there's like little things that could potentially go both ways where there's some leverage. Whereas, if certain other companies bought TikTok that didn't have any interest in China, there might not be the same thing, and there'd be like way more oversight. I imagine, like especially like they're talking about private equity companies, like potentially being the only ones who can afford to buy TikTok in America. Amazon obviously could afford to, but there's not tons of companies that could afford. Private equities being one of them. Like a private equity company owning TikTok, that private equity company would be trying to like micromanage like every every little aspect of it. And who even knows if TikTok would agree to that? They've said they might just pull out. Like, but if it's someone like Amazon where they feel that they could maybe have a bit of negotiating leverage on both sides, maybe that's the only thing that they accept a deal for.
Yeah, I feel like they're one of the last big cap tech companies that doesn't have like a social media type play to their business. So it would be cool to see them do that and it make them a lot stronger. I feel like as if they're not strong enough now. But yeah, we'll watch that going forward. For the last topic of the day, before I announce it, we are fastly approaching 2,000 people that have tuned into the stream today. So thank you all so much for watching and tuning in. Hope you liked today's content. I have 11 stocks in the Russell 1000 that have been up over 100% year to date. So I'll read them off for you all right now. And George, if you just want to, listen to the list and then give, there's obvious ones, but if you want to call out some of the stocks that really shock you or maybe flew under the radar so far this year. But here's the list. So we have Shark Ninja, Natera, Palantir, Tenet Healthcare, Vistra, MicroStrategy, NVIDIA, Carvana, AppLovin, Kava, and Viking Therapeutics. So it's a longer list, 11 companies, but did any catch your attention of stocks that you're a little bit surprised have performed that well?
Nothing really like surprised me. But it does interest. We just added AppLovin in our investing letter, and not only is that a very silly name for a company, I feel like I realized that I had no idea what they do, so I was like, oh, maybe it's a an interesting thing to add. But no.
Sillier than Shark Ninja, or
Well,
just
Shark
about the
Ninja
same?
is I feel like that's got to be like the vacuums, right?
Yeah,
So I mean, only silly because I don't really know what they do, and it just makes them sound like it kind of makes them sound like a fast food joint, not what they are, an ad platform, which makes a lot of sense that they would grow. Um, nothing really surprises me other than the thing that, I mean, it doesn't surprise me, but it's what we always say in terms of like Nvidia, and just like it's crazy you hear the other companies that have grown that much, and like Nvidia stands out as like by far the largest one there. And that's why we continue to see what we see in terms of like people just pushing the price of that stock up, and maybe some other ones, because it truly is incredible how much Nvidia has grown, you know in light of the fact that it's way bigger than the rest of those companies. I think MicroStrategy is pretty big too. And I mean, of course, MicroStrategy's there. For those that don't know, it's like a Bitcoin company. Um, yeah, but even if you look at them, their market cap is like 26 billion. So
hmm
you're talking about like a small fraction of like where Nvidia is at. And I would actually be interested to know,
basically
um,
like 1%.
yeah, I would be interesting to know if any of those companies uh, were anywhere close to Nvidia
I would think
in
that
terms of
Palantir
market
is
cap.
probably the second biggest on the list at like 60 billion ish. I think it's about.
Yeah,
Um,
uh,
we have come to that point in the
81
stream.
billion, but like, yeah, I think it's coming pretty, like, yeah.
We did cross the 2,000 mark, so thank you everybody for tuning in. We are about to do our switch over. Last I checked, QQQ and SPY net option sentiment were both at fairly bullish levels. So everyone stick around and watch us make some moves in the model portfolio. But George, we'll see you on the other side.
Yep.
All right, so everybody stick with me for a moment as George does the switch over, and I'll give you a live look on the signals we are seeing inside of Prospero for today. I'll also update you guys on the market. So the QQQ is down about 0.75%. The SPY is slightly negative, down 0.16%. And the Dow Jones and the IWM, the Russell, are both slightly up on the day. Comment right now, because we got a lot of people in here. Did you like the discussion to begin the stream, an in-depth look at the tech that will be driving, the future of the economy? AI is just beginning. It's a huge talking point on our channel and obviously our company, Prospero.Ai. So let us know right now in the comments. Did you like that? It was a little sidestep from the market, but we brought it back with the Microsoft applications of it. So let me know in the comments. But right now, I'm going to get a live look at the net options sentiment for the QQQ and the SPY. Good to see Topher. You enjoyed it. Glad to hear that. Matt brings a lot of great talking points from the Prospero newsletters that are released on Sunday nights. So I love hearing the recaps of that. Okay, so the QQQ is currently at 53. It's beginning to be in a strong uptrend. It did hit 58 a few days ago, so hopefully we see it stay at these elevated levels in the 50s, mid 50s, upper 50s. I think the highest I've ever seen it is in the 60s. So it's a fairly bullish level heading into the big FOMC meeting. I think it's a 2-day meeting tomorrow and Wednesday, but Wednesday is the major day. Well, the they'll release their final decision. Probably a lot of volatility heading. Actually, you know what? Probably volatility will remain maybe lower until that meeting happens and then kick up again. So whether that's positively or negative is yet to be determined. Let's look at the SPY, which is currently at 45 for net option sentiment. And the trend looks a lot like the QQQ, except the SPY is holding a little bit closer to the highs. It only peaked at 46, so it's right there. Obviously a little bit lower overall than the QQQ, but glad to see both of them are well off their low levels that we've seen. It's been a crazy couple, about 6 weeks now in the market since that August drop and the early September drop. But good to see things regaining some momentum to the upside. All right, let me look at I haven't done this in a while, but I feel like we have a lot of people in here today. So we need to get to double-digit likes on YouTube. We are at 8 right now. 2 more people in here. If you enjoyed the stream today, like it up. It's good for the YouTube algorithm, helps us grow Prospero and help investors all over YouTube.
Yeah, we're QQQ and SPY net option sentiment.
QQQ was 56. Let me just double check. I believe that's where it was. 53 is the QQQ, and the SPY is at 45.
Oh, I'm not sharing my screen yet. Right. I'm not.
All right, I saw some people liked on YouTube, so thank you. But that's the last time I'll ask for today, I promise.
All right. Brent, who helps me with these, he said I broke his back by like doing a midday thing. So I'm gonna try to like close these out at the end of the day and just open up new positions on this, because I did like, now that which I forget, but one of our readers or one of our watchers here made the very good suggestion of exiting positions based on momentum score, which was great. But we're gonna spare Brent from having to do that live.
Tech is in a bit of a correction here, which we did sort of expect based on our long and short positions in our investing letter. And a well-timed SWKS short this morning. Looking like the main takeaway is opportunistic long ads as well as a few consumer discretionary shorts. Small caps stood above the rest last Friday, but look to have evened out a bit, so we won't target any. So are you saying that momentum has been proven to be better for exiting versus entering positions?
No, we're doing both. We're just entering them and not really looking to use it to exit. And it's definitely been better performance when we when we exit,
Both ways.
when we don't just open them up, because like we were missing some of the turnaround. So
Mhm.
it's definitely better to be stringent about it. I'm just going to do it at the end of the, so it's
Mhm.
easier. So it's easier for to get the exits, and that's fine, because like the nice thing is we can look if momentum has changed on any of the ones we even added today. So I think that'll be, that'll be helpful. I wonder why that didn't refresh. Whatever. Not of my concern. Oh, that's 913. We don't want that. Okay. That's one end. What's going on with EVH? Be careful with that. All right. All right. Any consumer cyclical. Oh. We've got some choices. Darden restaurants. And then TM. Ooh, Toyota Motors. What is Thor Industries? Recreation. That looks good. All right. Anything else? Oh, okay. We might have. That's down too much. We might have missed the boat on that. We don't want to catch a falling knife here. I think that's good to add. Well, what happened with these? All right. That one. All right. I think we already have. How many Apple? I think we have two, but whatever. We can have more. It's doing well. Your restoration hardware. That'll work. Definitely adding more long than short. We're going to exit later.
The market seems a bit tentative heading into a big week for the Fed. We've actually seen bets for a 0.5 decrease surpass bets for a 0.25. So you'd expect a more optimistic market today, but the market's been volatile enough overall that nothing should surprise us. Nothing should surprise anyone.
Okay, I think that's good. We're going to send in a second, but I want to check on URI because I might add URI and or GE and GE's got a really nice. Let's look at URI versus GE. That is nice. It's going down. It's going down too. Zillow is better, but I don't think. I'm not sure I want Zillow. All right, we're going to send this. All right, any other questions before I retire to figure out what I'm going to add?
I don't see any other questions, but I just want to say we got a big stream today, so thank you everybody really so much for tuning in. Glad you guys liked the stream, but I think that's going to do it for today.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.
All right. Thank you, George. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'll see you all Wednesday. Have a good day.